Welcome to the Bill of Materials import tutorial for the Impact Estimator for buildings. YouTube limits the length of our videos to 15 minutes, so this tutorial will be split into two parts. The purpose of the Bill of Materials import utility is to allow the user to export the bill of materials of a building that has been designed in a CAD program and then import that bill of materials into a project's individual assembly groups or an extra basic materials assembly, without having to manually enter each material or to model each assembly in the traditional fashion in Impact Estimator. This is an updated version of this tutorial after the release of version 5.2 of the Impact Estimator in December 2016 to include the new feature that allows users to classify their imported materials by assembly type, floors, walls, etc. I have Impact Estimator open, but I'm going to switch over to Excel for a minute, and this is the example file that we're going to be using for this exercise. This is an export from a CAD program, I don't know which. Many different CAD programs will have different formats or the information that they can export, but this is sort of a typical export. It's a pretty short file just for the purposes of this exercise. But you'll see here I've got two tabs down here in the spreadsheet, concrete and steel, and we're looking at the concrete tab at the moment. And you'll see here it's got some information on the structural units that were exported from the CAD program. A material volume here, looking at the first row, 115.5 cubic feet, a wall type, basement, and a material. Now you see the material name here is concrete, cast in place concrete, and it's the same material name in every row. And that's going to be a problem because in the Impact Estimator we want to model different types of concrete for different assemblies. So for instance, these wall assemblies will have a different concrete than the columns and beams and the floors and the foundations down below, you'll see here. So I've done some work in Excel beforehand, and I'm just going to unhide those columns now. And you'll see here, in order to distinguish the different types of concretes, I've had to make up a name for each one. So for instance, I'm just calling this one wall concrete for the wall, columns and beam concrete, etc., etc. The other thing we have to look out for is that this material volume column over here, column B, that is one cell. It has the quantity of material and the unit of measure in the same cell, and we need to separate those. We need those two in two different columns. So I've done that over here in Excel. I'm not going to go through these formulas in Excel, but I've separated them here, so now we have a quantity column and a unit of measure column, cubic feet, excuse me. And the other one I've added over here, the other column is this group column, and I've divided it by wall, columns and beams, floor, foundations, columns and beams, and walls. And you'll see that this is similar to these this column C over here, which came out of the CAD program, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the difference between these two and why it's good to do it yourself over here in this far right column. So that's the Excel sheet that we're going to be importing from. I'm going back to the Impact Estimator. I have a project loaded in the tree. It's an empty project at the moment, and we're going to use this in our example. So I'm going to right click here on the project node in the tree, and I'm going to scroll down to BOM file import, bill of materials file import, and click that button. And this is the dialog box that will show up. We have a help file down here, a button for a help file down there, which explains these steps that we're going to go through. And there's four steps at the top here. You load a file, map the columns, map the rows, and map the material contribution types. So we'll go through those. So first thing is we want to load the file. So I'm going to browse for a file. I happen to be in the folder that I want to be in at the moment. I found the file, BOM import example, and you'll see here it's an Excel file. You can also import XML files and tab delimited text files. But we have Excel, and you'll see here there's two different tabs, two different worksheets in that file, and we're going to use the concrete, so that's correct there. And I'm going to hit load. We load that file, and you'll see this is basically a copy of that file we were just looking at in Excel. The header and data files, rows, excuse me, data in the spreadsheet need to be distinguished. It's done it automatically here. You'll see here it's decided that these first two rows are header files, and that the starting at row 3 is data, and this is what we're really interested in, is the data rows down here. If this is incorrect, you can specify the start of your data row here, hit load again, and that will, well, let's try it. We can put in, let's say we think the data starts in row 4. If I hit load again, you'll see here it's said data, that the first data row is row 4. And that's how you can get rid of some of the sort of extra stuff at the top if it doesn't apply to your quantities. But I'm going to go back here and change it to 3. I'm going to load it so we have our header and data rows set. The next step is map the columns. So what we have here is the same spreadsheet, of course, but we want to tell the impact estimator which columns to read which information from. And you'll see here it's already done so. It's already mapped this column to the material contribution type. That's our assembly group type. It's mapped this column called material name to material name, and it's mapped this column to quantity, and this column to unit of measure. But in fact these are wrong. What we don't want to do these columns. So I'm going to unmap this first contribution column, and I'm going to unmap this material name. I'll spread this out a little bit. You see this original material name, that's the one where all the materials have the same name. So I want to unmap that. And this is the material name column that we made, wall concrete, column beam concrete, etc., etc. Quantity is correct, unit of measure is correct, and then this last column is our material contribution type. So we've hit the 4 columns that we want the impact estimator to read. The tab is green up here, that means all 4 columns have been selected. There is a checkbox here where if you do not want to map the material contribution, that's that last column, you can click there and you only have to map 3 of the columns. But we're done. We have a green tab. We're going to go to the next step, and that's map the rows. And mapping the rows, this is the heart of the exercise, is we need to match the material names and totals from our spreadsheet to specific material names and quantities in the impact estimator. So starting with the first row here, we have this material called wall concrete. We need to assign a material name to it. So I'm going to go over here to the mapping filters, and I'm going to choose concrete from the material type, and then from material list you'll see our the concrete types that are available in the database. So there's concrete blocks here, etc., etc. I'm just going to choose the first concrete benchmark, 2500 psi, and that's what we're going to use for our wall concrete. And you'll see here that wall concrete, the first one is matched to concrete benchmark 2500 psi, and all of the other wall concretes get mapped at the same time too. And you'll see down here we had some other wall concretes at the bottom of the list, and they got mapped as well. So we have our material mapped, but we don't have a total. We have a total of 0 here. And the problem is, the reason for that is that we have a unit of measure called CF here, which is cubic feet. And the units of measure in the database are in a table, and CF does not exist in that table. FT3, which is feet cubes, that does exist, but the term CF does not exist. So we want to add this conversion factor to our library, and we want to use it for the rest of the materials as well. So I'm going to go up here. We have 3 buttons at the top here: rescan mapping libraries, show unit of measure mapping library, and show material mapping library. So I'm going to click on the unit of measure mapping library, and we have a bunch of units of measure here. There are fairly long list, but like I said, we don't have CF. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I find feet cubed here, cubic feet, and I want to convert to cubic meters, and that's this number here, the conversion factor column. And that's the conversion factor. So I'm going to use Control C, I'm going to copy that number, and I'm going to get out of my unit of measure mapping library. I have that number in my clipboard, so I'm going to Control V to paste that in, and there's the conversion factor that we want to use for cubic feet to cubic meters, 0.283. And you'll see that 115.5 cubic feet times 0.0283 is equal to 3.27, etc. cubic meters. Now when I did that, and we've got this first row map, you'll see these icons on the right have highlighted, and each that's saved to Material Mapping Library and saved to Unit of Measure Mapping Library. And what that does is it will save to the library this name. Wall concrete is equal to concrete benchmark 25 psi. So I'm going to click that and save it. And I want to save that unit of measure in there as well. So I'm going to save that to the library by clicking the second icon. Now you'll see here it has only mapped the first unit of measure. If I hit rescan mapping libraries, you'll see there everywhere that it says CF with the material name has been mapped, and the other wall concretes at the bottom will be the same. So those are complete. And I'll just show you quickly the unit of measure mapping library that we saw before. All of these at the top are in gray. Those are the database values, and at the bottom this new CF with that new number has been added there. And it's in our library to be used again and again and again. So I'm going to click OK there, and I'll show the other mapping library, the material mapping library, and you'll see we've mapped our first material. Wall concrete is equivalent to concrete benchmark 2500 psi in meters cubed, and we're set to go there. So the next thing to do is to do the next material. And the next material is column and beam. So again, I need to column and beam concrete, so I need to pick a concrete for that, and I'm just going to pick the next one in the list just so it's different. And you'll see here it's mapped all of the column and beam concretes to our concrete benchmark 3000 psi, and because CF is now in our unit of measure mapping library, that gets mapped as well. So that one's done. Now I have to remember I want to save that material mapping, so I'm going to click that first icon, and that will be in our material mapping library. You'll see column and beam concrete is matched to concrete benchmark 3000 psi. Okay, so we need to do the next ones. Floor concrete, same thing. I'm going to choose concrete. I'm going to choose the next one in the list, 4000 psi, and I'm going to save that material mapping. Foundation concrete is another type, and I'm going to match that to the next one in the list, and I'm going to save that material type. And you'll see we have foundation concretes here. They've all been mapped, and these are the wall concretes as well. So all of these materials have been mapped. We have 100% complete up here, and our tab is green, so this step is finished. I'm just going to quickly show the material mapping library again, and you'll see here are the 4 concretes that we've just saved in our library. We're close to our time limit for YouTube videos, so I'm going to stop here, and we'll pick up where we left off in part 2 of the video.